To infinity and beyond. If you've seen any of the Toy Story movies, you no doubt recognized Buzz Lightyear's trademark call to action. And in some ways, it's an apt description of where the disciples find themselves on this first Easter evening. At this point in the Gospel of John, Mary Magdalene is the only one who has actually seen the risen Christ. Oh, Peter and the disciple whom Jesus loved, likely John himself, have seen the empty tomb, but they didn't stick around hoping to figure out what had happened to Jesus. Instead, they left Mary there on her own. And so she is the only one who encounters someone she first thinks is the gardener and then comes to recognize as Jesus when he speaks her name. And Jesus then entrusts her with the message of his resurrection. Oh, what a message it is. If the Jesus whom they saw crucified, dead, and buried is alive and on the loose once more, then everything is changed. Death has been defeated, and the sin that divides us and causes pain and suffering, cruelty and hate has been denied the final word. This news cracks open, no, flings wide the gates of infinity. What once was limited has become unlimited, unbound, and free. Well, that kind of news takes a while to get used to figure out, to begin to live into. No wonder the little community of disciples and followers have gathered behind locked doors that first Easter evening. They need to be together, to talk things out, to try to make sense of this startling but uncorroborated story that Mary has told them. Their world has changed in ways they never begin to imagine. How do you move forward when you aren't sure what that looks like anymore? How do you shape your life when all the things you thought you knew have been turned upside down? And then, suddenly, despite the locks on the doors and the fear in their hearts and the confusion in their minds, he is suddenly standing in their very midst. And for those who are there, any doubt vanishes. They can see the evidence of suffering on his body. They can hear his familiar voice full of love saying, "Peace be with you." They even feel his living breath upon their faces, somehow giving them strength and courage and purpose once more. Like Mary at the tomb, now they too have seen the risen Christ. Well, except for Thomas. He's gone missing for some reason. Maybe they sent him out to get more bread and wine, or maybe he went to the tomb to look to see if he could find Jesus. Or maybe he went out to see what rumors were making the rounds. Or maybe he just needed some time alone to be with his grief and with this surprising and impossible news from Mary. Who knows? All we know is that as soon as he walks through the door, he can see it on their faces. Something big has happened, and he has missed it. "Oh, Thomas," they tell him, "we have seen the Lord." I don't know about you, But my heart just breaks when I imagine that scene. Their excitement and Thomas' disappointment. To be the one overlooked, left out, somehow not worthy of this wonderful thing that everyone else got to experience. Do I not matter to him? I hear him thinking. Did he even notice I wasn't here? Couldn't he have waited just a few more minutes? Oh. And then amid all that hurt and that longing, the words tumble out of his mouth that will mark him for the ages. Unless I see the mark of the nails in his hands, and I put my finger in the mark of those nails, and put my hand in his side, I will not believe. Oh, the things we say when we are hurting. And because of those words, we think of him as doubting Thomas, as if we ourselves never had a single moment of doubt or uncertainty. But there is so much more to Thomas than just his doubts, just as there is for all of us too. Earlier in this gospel, when Jesus announces that he is headed toward Jerusalem, and they all knew what that would mean, Thomas is the one who says, well, let us also go with him, that we might die with him. That's not a statement of doubt about Jesus or about his mission, but a firm declaration of intent and commitment. And on that last night when they will all be together before Jesus goes to the cross, when Jesus starts talking what sounds like nonsense about going ahead of them to prepare a place that they already know how to find, it's Thomas who says to him, Thomas who dares to say to him, how can we know the way when we don't know where you're going? Thomas dares to say what they're all thinking, even when no one else speaks up. He trusts Jesus enough to ask the question, to ask for clarity, when no one else has the courage to. And I think it's worth noting that a week later, a week that Thomas has spent with his questions and his doubts and his fears, a week later, Thomas is there with the others when Jesus comes again. Thomas doesn't give up on the gathered community as a place to come to know the risen Christ, even if he hasn't gotten to have the same experience that they did. And this time when Jesus comes, he says, "Peace be with you," and then he makes a beeline to Thomas. "Here you go," he says. "Put your finger in the wounds, your hand in my side. Whatever you need to do to believe, do it." Now, Jesus doesn't make that offer to anyone else. At the empty tomb, he even tells Mary not to touch him, not to hold on to him. And when he shows up that first Easter evening, he shows the others his hands in his side. But he doesn't say, "Come touch him." But for Thomas, Jesus does. He offers Thomas what Thomas says he needs. And in that moment, Thomas realizes that's not what he needed at all. He just needed to know that Jesus loved him, that he mattered, and so he falls to his knees and he declares, "My Lord and my God." Thomas knows that this Jesus standing in front of him is more than Rabboni, teacher, as Mary named him. He is even more than just Lord, as the others called him. Thomas, that doubter, that risk taker, that questioner, is the one who recognizes that God's very own self, is somehow present in the risen Christ. God's love for us finds its fullest expression in and through Jesus, and Thomas somehow knows that. And somehow, knowing that, he never gets around to touching the wounds at all. There's one more thing about Thomas that bears mentioning this morning. Before church tradition named him Doubter, Thomas was also called Didymus. That's the Greek word for twin. Now, we never find out who his twin might be, though some think perhaps it's Matthew, because they're often mentioned together in the list of disciples along with the other brothers. But we don't really know that. And it doesn't really matter, because Thomas is our twin, yours and mine. Like him, we are capable of acts of daring commitment and times of deepest doubt, hours of baffled questioning and moments of sudden clarity as we seek to grow in faith and to allow that faith to shape our lives. Thomas stands as the hinge between those who saw and touched and walked with Jesus during his time on earth and those of us who will never have the opportunity to know Jesus in precisely that way. The link between the disciples then and all those through the ages who have also come to believe through the power of the Spirit. Thomas is precious to Jesus, and so too is precious to God. Wherever Thomas is along his life's journey, he matters and is loved beyond measure. And so are we, no matter where we find ourselves today. To infinity and beyond. Sometimes it takes a while to figure out what events might mean, to figure out which way beyond even lies. That was true of Jesus' followers in those early days, living between the resurrection and whatever would come after. Next week, we will join them as the church begins to take shape and they begin to move out into the world beyond Jerusalem and Judea. As we hear their stories, may we find courage and hope for our own time as we too seek to live into the beautiful beyond that Jesus calls us to help create. Oh, thanks be to God for this indescribable gift of love. Amen.